What do you understand by spirituality? What do you understand by spiritual practice? Whatever your understanding is pretty well mapped out in Buddhism. In Buddhism you have the threefold training. The training of morality, of meditation, and of wisdom. These are the three spheres that you focus on. And they're spelled out in more detail in the Eightfold Path. There's a clear understanding, with focused intention. You observe your speech, the quality of your speech. Is it truthful? Is it harmonious? And so on. You follow the precepts to do with abstinence from killing, sexual misconduct, and so on. You be careful with who you associate with. Other people can bring you down. So associate with people who don't do this. You observe your mind. You observe its wholesome and unwholesome tendencies. You do not indulge the unwholesome tendencies. You encourage the wholesome tendencies. You practice mindfulness. You're not an automatic. You're aware of what your body's doing, of how you're feeling, and of your thoughts. And you practice meditation. You practice the absorptions, focused, calming, steady meditation. So there you have it, if you're a Buddhist. I think, though, we can understand this generally as not being led by the senses, not giving in to egoistic self-indulgence. And in general, we might be motivated by the desire to become a better person, or to make the world a better and safer place. There might be all other sorts of practices we do, particular meditation practices, or different types of yoga. But there does seem to be this fundamental understanding that the main problem is desire, sense or sensual desires. We're caught up in this grip of wanting, never quite satisfied. If we were satisfied, there would never be an issue. But we're never satisfied. This is dukkha, this is suffering. This state of constantly being unsatisfied. Now in these verses, this is all cut through with a stroke. And that stroke is the realization of no birth, which is what the current sequence of verses are directing us to. It's a very difficult path to try and control the senses, and it's one that many people with greater or lesser degrees of success pursue. But they're all based on the assumption that there is actually a world out there. A world that contains enticing objects of desire. But if we realised that the world had no intrinsic reality, well, this would solve the problem. In an instant, once you realise that a mirage is a mirage, then all the hope you have invested in it disappears. Once you wake up from a dream, then all the passions, all the fears, all the desires disappear in an instant. There may be some habitual momentum. There may be some habitual behaviour carrying on. It's got its own momentum, but it's not driven by anything. Once you realise you have some other options, though, it's easy just to step out of it like a snake shedding its skin. So let's press on with this realisation of no birth. Verse 592. The getting rid of the idea that things are caused, the removal of the dualism of imagined and imagining, the being liberated from the alternatives of being and non-being. This I state to be no birth. So we move beyond the idea that things have a cause. This totally upends all conventional ways of thinking and all spiritual ways of thinking, or at least religious ways of thinking. But spiritual ways of thinking, most of us will subscribe to the idea of karma. It's about cause and effect. You reap what you sow. There are such things as reward and retribution. We're steeped in such understanding. Can we drop it? This is the getting rid of the idea that things are caused. It's getting rid of the idea that the world has a history, that I have a history. We come back to the fact of our own aliveness, fact of our own sentience. Might not seem like much, but it's a very rich thing to explore. There's also the removal of the dualism of imagined and imagining. So the causality, causation, refers to the world out there. And we're taught about the world out there by the culture that we inhabit. Our culture will teach us certain things about the world out there, and we imbibe this. Much of it might be implicit rather than explicit. But this is what's referred to as the imagined. It's how the world is imagined to be. And this affects us. This affects our own imagination. And this is the imagining. We either use our own imagination to reinforce the world that is imagined, or we might use our imagination to rebel against the world as it's been presented to us and come up with other ideas, other imaginings. Once we do this, and once this happens, we're liberated from the alternatives of being and non-being. And this is the understanding that there was once nothing, and then there's something, either in relation to the world or in relation to ourselves. We have this understanding that we are a limited being. At one point we didn't exist, and at some future point we won't exist either. These are non-being, and within these two huge slabs of non-being, we've got this little life going on. This is being. But when you come back to that realization, which I described here as a sense of aliveness, a sense of our own sentience, I'm just trying to point to something definite. As we move away from the mirage. It's one thing realizing that everything's a mirage, but where does that leave you? Well, there is something very palpable, very real. I usually describe it as a sense of being, a sense of centeredness, of witnessing, of presence, of aliveness. There are no words here. We are liberated from all understanding. We're liberated from ideas, from all ideas. This no birth. We could call it no idea. But this is what's being indicated by no birth. And the Buddha hammers this home again and again in the next few verses.